Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we have a look at the 1960 film Peeping Tom. This is episode 408. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castlebridge Media, home of the Castle of Horror anthology. I'm so excited to be back. With me from Austin is Tony Sabaggio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, which you can find at Global Comics. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, and get this, he is a Best Writer Ringo nominee again. This week we had news that once again, for a second time, Drew Edwards is nominated for a Best Writer Ringo award. So congratulations.
Oh yeah.
He is
Thank you. And that means I'm not a fluke. That means it wasn't just a crazed accident the
we
first
knew that.
time.
It wasn't.
We always do
Somebody didn't accidentally just get the names switched around. Some Drew, it's so good to have you back. Hello. And congratulations.
Thank you.
And finally, also in Denver, color commentary from Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello, and I don't trust a man who walks quietly. My quote for today.
Solid advice.
Julia, we've been all over the place, right? We were in Pittsburgh when Taylor Swift was there.
Oh no, Jason and I have now missed 4 opportunities to see Taylor Swift because we were in Pittsburgh for the 2 nights she was in Pittsburgh, and then she's been in Denver for the last 2 nights here. So
yes, and it's so strange. I went to see Joe Bob Briggs, at least at his meet and greet at the Archive Colorado when Taylor Swift was here, and I was at the Stoker Con when she was in Pittsburgh. So I am now in the habit of going to horror-oriented events whenever Taylor Swift comes to town.
But last weekend we were in Albuquerque with 13 people that we knew in high school theater. Jason and I met in high school theater, for those who don't know. And one of our friends there, Ross Lambert, says he subscribes to this podcast. So shout out to Ross if he's listening. And anybody else from that lovely reunion weekend who might be listening. It was super fun. We had a blast.
It was super fun, and the weird thing is, I think you say 13 drama geeks get together in a giant house in Albuquerque, and it sounds like it'll be a thriller, but actually everybody was surprisingly well behaved. I think that might be just a function of age. What about y'all? Anybody do anything interesting?
I started a cult.
Well, you're the head of a cult. I mean, you're nominated for a Ringo again, so that's exciting news. Tony, what do you got going on?
Basically, I mean, let's see. I've been trying to wrangle a guitarist for our future live shows. Hasn't happened yet, sadly. But I do have the first mixes for the new Deserts of Mars album in my on my devices and listening to it profusely, so I can make notes so we can try to get it out. I don't know if it'll be this year. I hope this year, but it depends on if labels, how labels are stacked and if I can even do that. So, but yeah, that's been my biggest thing. That is basically just catching up on everything and work. So.
Wonderful. I also, since we had our last show, the Hollywood has ground to a halt. I will say, as somebody who has a lot of meetings with people who are looking at optioning things that we're publishing and so forth, because I and Intrio run a small publishing company. So we have these meetings all the time, and ever since the end of last summer, people were like, I don't know, let's kind of push this down the road because there's probably going to be a strike in a few months. Strike is coming in May, and I'm telling you, as of September, people were like, look, the strike is coming in May. We don't want to talk until we know whether that's going to happen or not. So when the strike finally came, it was like that moment in The Dark Knight Returns when the storm that everybody's been waiting for, finally the sky cracks open and it begins to rain. The Hollywood shut down with the WGA strike, and now the SAG strike is happening simultaneously. So I haven't been to Hollywood lately, so I don't know if there's tumbleweeds in the streets, but that's basically Yeah, fascinating stuff. Okay, but let's talk about something that is not Hollywood at all. We are here talk. We've been, if you recall, right before we took our break, we were covering these Scream movies, and we had gone through the entire series, and now we're reaching back to sort of the road to the modern slasher. And this is a film that many people feel is important to the history of the slasher film, which is Peeping Tom. But boy, is it different. So, just to give you an idea, Peeping Tom is a 1960 British psychological horror thriller film directed by Michael Powell, written by Leo Marks, and stars Carl Bohm, Anna Massey, and Moira Shearer. It revolves around a serial killer who murders women while using a portable film camera to record their dying expressions of terror, which is pretty dark stuff. And there's a lot of voyeurism going on, which is where the title Peeping Tom goes. This was a very, very ahead of its time, very controversial film when it came out. Since then, very justifiably recognized both in Britain and the United States as a fine film, an important film. The British Film Institute called it one of the top 100 British films of all time. So I think it's kind of cool that we get a chance to talk about it. Let's do opening thoughts. Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll take us into the topics. So, Tony, first of all, have you ever seen Peeping Tom before, and what are your thoughts?
I have not. But before that, I want to go back to what you were talking about, because now that you've done this opposite Taylor Swift thing, now there's plausible deniability for any horror shenanigans that she might. She has an alibi now for any
Yes.
horror shenanigans that might have happened that you don't know about. But anyway,
That's great.
no, I hadn't seen this movie before, and I didn't know quite what to expect. When you hear like precursor to slasher or the first slasher movie or the any of those terms as far as the kind of starting a genre, right? That could go either way. It could be kind of clumsy, or it could be, that doesn't always. It could be successful, maybe not. But this is definitely on the. It's a very British movie, and I mean that in the best possible sense. Like there's a feel to it that when you say that. Also, I'm kind of surprised when you say that it's one of the most important films, because it's easily could have just been kind of fit into the kind of video nasty kind of, I guess it's film, but you know what I mean? Like I'm surprised that it reached that because it could have just as easily been in the, kind of pushed
Yeah,
to
it
the
could have been
side as far
tossed.
as being, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating. The psychological drama part of it is really fascinating. And it's got a lot going on as far as, generational trauma and who the characters are and why they get together and why they interact, and all of that, along with the soundtrack and the kind of time. The fact it's a movie within a movie feel as well is really interesting. What it does to it's got some pop psychology stuff in it as well as some terrible, this our villain in this he never had a chance, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about where it comes from, and I'm surprised I haven't seen it because it seems like something I would have, somebody would have brought up and said, hey, this is something you need to see. But I'm glad that's all the more reason why we should cover it here. So I think I didn't know how it was going to be, and I found that there's a lot of meat on the bone for this one.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to start. Actually, Julia was next. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm the one who wanted to watch this because they did mention it in the Scream movies, and I was like, "Oh, well, we're doing Scream, we should do this." And so I'm really glad we did. I think it's super interesting. It came out around the same time as Psycho, but unlike Psycho, it kind of got put, just people just really hated it. They reacted very violently to it, and it was only on something like, what was it, 40 days or something that it was. No, what was it? I don't know. Some really short amount, maybe 4 days. But there was a really short amount of time that it was out before they shelved it because in England they were like, no, this is too disturbing. And especially people were really just offended by the fact that the director Michael Powell actually used himself and his real life son as the father and son in the
Wow,
home
yeah.
movies, the home movies that that Mark is watching. So it's like the fact that he's so overly identifying, with all the all the stuff going on. But it's very it's very thought provoking. This whole idea of like what's okay, what's not okay. Like at what point, how intrusive are we all being watching these people? There's I don't know. I have a lot that I want to say, but I don't want to jump into it just yet. But
No
yes, it was
problem.
really interesting.
So you're saying it kind of did fall what I kind of thought might have been is originally it was not in the top films of
No, it
top
was
100 films.
no, it was like super. In fact, it was like
Oh
basically on
yeah,
the shelf for years and years.
right,
Absolutely.
right. That makes sense. Okay, yeah.
It was reviled. The people who watched it were just deeply offended by. If you
They
think of
pulled
the
it after
hate,
5 days. I just found it. 5 days they
okay.
pulled it from the British
I
films.
mean, that even though Mark dies, spoilers by the way, once again, even though Mark dies, there's you really do spend a lot of time like experiencing his tension and his and there's a lot of care for him, and I think people were just deeply disturbed by it. Drew, what are your thoughts?
This is my second time seeing it, and the first time, honestly, it didn't leave that much of an impression on me because I think there was a little too much, I guess, hype
Hmm.
around, like, oh, this is the first slasher movie. And alongside Psycho, I guess I do understand why people call it that, but it has some building blocks in there, but it's not really, like, I still think you have to get to like Texas Chainsaw and Halloween to see what somebody who is in my age group would think of as a proper slasher movie.
Yeah.
So revisiting it this time, I actually was much more impressed by it. This is a very sophisticated movie. It's got a lot of interesting shots, like the fact that it is a sort of macabre character study of this disturbed young man, kind of almost puts it alongside something like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or something
Mm,
like that. It's a very beautiful movie. That like late 50s, early 60s, color tone is
yeah.
on full effect. So all the actors and actresses look like beautiful in this movie. It's interesting to me that it was so infamous at the time because it definitely feels pretty tame when you think about it. By now,
Hmm.
like, the subject matter is not tame, but like the way the violence the depicted actually is. I do think there are some outdated ideas about sexuality in this movie that I found kind of interesting, if not a bit quaint. Like the idea
Hmm.
that, like, of course, this deviant is going to be a pinup photographer. I thought that made me chuckle
Yeah.
quite a bit. But still very impressive film, and definitely glad that we're coming in to discuss it, so I could give it a sort of reappraisal tonight, because I think this is a wonderful movie that more people should go out of their way to see.
That's really wonderful. Thank you very much. I actually also, it was my second time watching it. I had seen it once at the Alamo Draft House in Denver, and I remember really loving. I didn't feel it as much as this time. I was really watching it very, very closely. I think the last time I watched it, it was just a cursory view, and I mainly was just enjoying the color. Which, by the way, just to spend a moment on that, the texture and color, the Eastman color of this movie is just it's like a red velvet cake that you can bite. It is so you can touch the texture of this movie. It is really wild. And
I just want to say I appreciate the use of like a red velvet cake that you can buy. That was like simile 101 right there. Like, you should be a writer, is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
thank you. That's so kind. But I mean, it's like I don't know if I wonder if you can fake this texture with like if I with a digital like if I said, "Hey, Tony and Drew, let's make a movie that
There,
looks like Eastman color." Can you do it? Can it be done?
the Love Witch kind of does something similar,
And
Yeah.
the
but I think
shadows. The shadows are incredible.
I
Yes.
think that
Yes,
you're
yes.
also, yeah, you also, there's a little bit of grit to it that's not in if you try to make this now. I mean, to be honest, I mean, as much as we love digital, some of the things you just have to kind of shoot on that camera with that film.
Yeah.
I think you could probably come close if you paid attention. I think the answer I think would be yes if you had people who knew what to look for. Because I find, this a little bit of a tangent, but you'll see people who go, "Oh, I want to do this thing that's like an 8-bit game."
Yeah.
But then it will look close. But if you grew up playing those games, there's you can usually easily spot where that doesn't quite work. And and a lot of it's because it just wants to be homage. But if you really, really wanted to do it, you pay attention to exactly how many colors you can have on the screen and that kind of stuff. But so if you were going to do this, I think you probably could with modern color grading. But, I think if you really want to do it, you pay the cost and shoot it on that film. And
Well, Anna Biller, since you mentioned The Love Witch, since she was struggling with exactly this question, she said that part of it was the film and the other piece was the lighting. Like, in other
yes,
words,
yes.
that she said there's a kind of flat lighting everywhere where you just bathe the entire place
Well,
in light.
But again,
That's
that brings the shadows.
I don't know. I
yeah,
don't know if you're going to be able to do it even with, like, if you're going to go that way. That's totally right. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that with, say, well, I bought this light rig and it's all LEDs or it's all modern lights.
yeah,
Like, not to say you have to go back and get some vintage bulbs or whatever, right? But you do have to put together a team that can understand
yeah.
what it meant to light things and film them a certain way. And it depends on how far you wanted to take that, I think. But
Yeah.
I'll see people too often where they'll try a certain thing, but then they'll cheap out on the things that really made it. And then you often get a kind of superficial version of that, and sometimes that can be used to good effect, right? But if you were saying I did it exactly like, I've seen articles where somebody said, "Oh, I did it exactly like they did it in the past," and that's not really true because XYZ. So
Because
yeah,
it's almost impossible.
sure.
Fascinating. Jim Towns, our good friend of the podcaster in his own right, makes films, and some of these I kind of wish he were present because he could speak as a filmmaker and explain what he would do to try to crack that particular, if he wanted to, if that were if that were in the budget, and if that was something he wanted to do, like what would you do to try to make something look like Peeping Tom. But anyway, go watch this just for the color. Like, geez, there was, by the way, a black and white release of this film, and obviously, if you were watching this movie on television in the '70s, or in the '60s, there's a very good chance you may have seen it in black and white, and because there were black and white prints that were shown on TV and stuff, and I just can't imagine how this is a movie where black and white movies are good movies. This movie benefits from its color, and I just can't imagine that looking as stellar. uh all right, anyway, that's curiously enough, that's the discussion of color and texture. But I want to get into, let's talk about the world of Mark and Drew. What you were saying is the sort of the sexual world that Mark lives in. Tell us about that. Drew, go ahead. Who is Mark, and what are his many jobs?
Well, he is a camera, like he's a legitimate cameraman for a film studio.
Yeah.
He is a landlord of this big house that he inherited from his father.
Yeah.
More on that later.
Yeah.
And he is a pinup photographer. Basically,
Yeah.
he takes place in he takes part in what they would have called back in the day a photo club, in which he goes up into the upper room of this newsstand, and they have a setup up there where they have different facades to take pictures of models, and there's several models there, and they take pictures and then they sell them to people who want that kind
Okay, I
of
stop here for
material.
a moment. Is that real? In other words, is
That
somebody
is
like
that
I know
Absolutely.
is
pinups are real, but the
yeah, that
notion
is
that I'm
no,
gonna
that what they showed is 100% a real thing.
so you
Like
could
Well,
buy
and
your
I
pinups from this place at this corner, and you're gonna get different pinups from the place at a different corner.
Yeah, that's also how Betty Page
Yeah, I was gonna
operated
say
a lot.
that's
Yeah.
yeah.
but Pamela Green, who's the person who is nude in the studio, she was actually a nude model. Like she
Yeah.
actually,
Hmm.
so a lot of the if you look at the IMDb, a lot of the trivia has to do with just how many guys would just come in from all over the lot to come look at her be nude.
Well, I
Just
mean,
like, oh my
she's
god.
gorgeous, but like
But Betty
y-
Page was
I
right. That's my question. Betty Page was doing pinups and stuff, but in the world of this movie, you can have pinups. In other words, it's almost like each of these news agents is its own publisher. So
Well,
you could walk through town and get
well, it
different
wouldn't
stuff.
necessarily be a news agent. Like there was lots of things like this set up, and there was, of course, like pinup and fetish magazines too. But like this was a way to discreetly get this kind of material back
Mm.
at a time where it was considered more illicit, particularly like more, like the stuff that he's photographing in this is much more kind of traditional, just like
right.
cheesecake, I'm in
Yeah,
a corset and nylons kind of thing. But there, like the more S&M type stuff, particularly like the things, if you
Well,
think of
that's
like
what
Betty
we
Page.
saw, but what he's actually photographing is a nude woman. Like, because what said was that she was fully naked on the bed
Well,
when they're doing things.
she is topless at one point in this movie, but
Yeah, but I
um
think there's probably footage on a cutting room floor of her because they said that she was fully nude.
well, within the realm of the movie, I mean, you can extrapolate that he might be taking, pictures that are more explicit,
Mhm.
but the ones that we actually see him
Yeah.
taking are,
classic
they're
cheesecake. I mean,
they're
this
Right.
yeah, they're pretty
yeah.
tame. Like even like her topless, that would be more in the
Right.
realm of like early Playboy or something.
I was
Like
gonna
it's not,
say it's very Playboy like. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's not that like it's not like the Betty Page like tie me up, tie me down kind of
Mhm,
stuff, which would
mhm,
have been more but like like look, like to a degree like this kind of thing still does go on. It's not quite as commonplace, but like you know it's there's a subculture of this thing. And the thing that kind of made me raise my eyebrows and what I alluded to
yeah,
is, of course, well, the thing is about Mark is that he is a serial killer.
yeah,
And part of the reason why he is a serial killer is that he's very sexually repressed.
yeah,
And
mhm.
that is definitely a product of its time, I
yeah.
guess. Like it doesn't really jive. Like I've known quite a few people who are both S&M photographers and pinup photographers, and for the most part they're perfectly normal people
Right.
that are not these psychologically damaged, you know
Well,
weirdos.
well, for what it's worth, though, I mean, the police don't expect that either because the police kind of think that he's pretty boring, even if he's a pinup photographer. I
That
mean,
is true.
that the police do not expect for him to be a pervert.
Well,
Um,
Well,
they are investigating him.
yeah, but they're
that's
investigating him.
part of, but remember, that's also due to the fact that he has a legit movie studio job.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
he's using his skills as a pinup, like he's using his movie photography skills to
Yeah,
also be a really good pinup because if you can shoot a film, you're probably going to be most really good cinematographers are also going to know how to take a pretty damn good picture,
it's
right?
such an interesting concept that this guy who is a photographer of models is also deeply repressed and has a difficult time talking to them. That's
Well, that's because of his. I mean, that's what makes the film different than I'd expected. Was that's also part of his deep, all the psychological stuff that happened with his father, which caused him to be a filmmaker, which caused him to
Yeah.
be a cinematographer. The the other part of when you're asking about the kind of the pinup artist or the photo club,
Yeah.
so you'd have a bunch of people. So you'd have a bunch of amateur people who would be taking these photos, and then there was also a mail order aspect for some of them. And
Mhm.
Well,
then
yeah,
I
they
think
even
it was
allude to
Betty.
that in the movie.
I think there was I think it was Betty Page, one of the women in pinup history, who was saying, a lot of times though there were guys who would come in and they didn't have any film in their camera, like they
Right.
paid the fee, but there was no film in there. We kind of knew what they were doing. But I also kind of liked how they again of its time, but also how they view it. The guy who comes in who's just really awkward, and we have a newsstand that sells candy to kids
I
while
love it.
this guy's the whole interaction where you have a guy coming in like wanting to buy these photos, and
Yes.
he's a very kind of banker looking British guy, awkward. He's, oh, do you have the things?
A certain kind
I,
of views,
yeah,
don't you
I
know?
like
Yeah.
I like also how they put it in an educational book package, which is probably the equivalent. I mean, if any cop caught him, it would probably be the equivalent of the not porn folder on somebody's.
The hilarious thing, the porn in the brown paper bag, or brown paper envelope, is a joke that no longer has resonance with today's audience. I
Sure.
mean, like, I was thinking about Chico and the Man, and there was this episode when Chico 2, because after Freddie Prinze died, there was a younger Chico, and he orders some porn through the mail, and Grandpa from Willy Wonka is upset with him because he's like, "You're getting smut through the mail," and it comes in a brown paper. That was, everybody knows what that means. The brown paper packaging is just exactly equals adult material, and that's gone. That's been gone for 50 years.
See, that gives a whole new meaning to the brown paper packages tied up with string in the Julie Andrews song.
Goodness gracious!
I'm like, wait a minute, is Julie Andrews getting porn?
I
What?
mean, I hope so. She's a very, very lonely young woman.
Maria. Yeah.
Gosh, yeah, that's
Look, nuns have needs too.
oh
I
my
think
God.
the most interesting thing to me about this sequence, I mean, other than the fact that it is kind of a look back at all of the stuff that we are talking about, but also we have the one model that has a scar on her lip,
Yes.
and you see the way I actually find myself surprised they didn't bring that character back, because he has such a strong reaction to her.
What
she the one
is
he
his
killed?
reaction?
Well,
It's
She's the one he killed.
no, he doesn't
it's
kill her.
it's fascinating because he is fascinated by someone else. His inner harm and trauma is he's such a visual person because of the nature of his trauma. When he sees her and being out there, being a model, and not being perfect, it's a moth to a flame thing. And those are the really interesting bits of this movie. It's not just like slasher stuff. There's a deep kind of trauma, which again, some of it's pop psych and some of it, but he does such a great job of just immediately he's fascinated by this person who
Yeah.
has an outward disfigurement that he just can't look away, because you get the impression he feels some kind of kindred spirit in some way.
Yeah.
I also have flaws.
I still wonder if he doesn't maybe kill her, because his whole thing is that he only films people that he will possibly kill later. Like,
Yeah,
he's
but
like,
not
I always...
in the boudoir.
Well, no, he
It's
killed
unusual.
somebody.
Yeah, it's unusual when he starts to decompensate later. He does kill a model, but generally he only kills
He kills the blonde model.
he kills the blonde model.
How do you
But
know that?
because we see him do it. The lights go down when he's about to kill her.
We see the girl. Okay, I
Yeah,
remember that.
That's the same model you were just talking about. That was
Yeah, but I
in the
didn't
movie.
remember that who
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
saw him right before he killed her.
But
Yeah.
he only kills the people he photographs when he photographs them afraid. It's a complicated ritual, like a lot of people with sexual proclivities. He has rituals he has to go through, and the fear is a part of it for him. So, you
Well,
know,
it's also very true to life on how a real serial killer might behave, because serial killers are, ritualistic. They take
yeah,
trophies. He's doing that as well. What I think is so fascinating about the way this movie operates, though, is despite the fact that we are like from frame one, we are introduced to this guy, and the very first thing he does is he murders a prostitute.
yes,
This guy still, like, the actor portrays him in such a way that he still garners some sympathy from
Hmm.
you, because you can tell he doesn't, like, he knows there is something wrong with him, and
yeah,
he doesn't want to be this way,
yeah.
but he can't help himself either. He has
Yeah,
compulsions he can't control.
he does a lot of so much. This is a really interesting actor. It's interesting because they chose the director chose Carl, what's his last
Bone.
name, Baum, yeah, who is a German actor. He a little bit tries to do an English accent, but mostly he sounds German all the time. But if he's chosen because he's just so able to portray the emotional complexity of this character, and a lot of it is very physical, like the caressing of the camera, and then the hugging of, like, shielding the camera, and then he kind of shields himself a lot, like as if almost like, is it Nosferatu, or which one's the vampire that is kind of always just like doing the, like,
There's a
shielding
as
himself from
Klaus
light.
Kinski played Nosferatu,
Yeah.
he was always sort of hunched over
And
Hmm.
shielding himself a little
shielded.
bit. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
how I feel about this character too. It's like he's always just kind of, just it's like, I don't know if it's probably a combination protection and shame, where he's just like, but always doing this whole thing with his hands and his arms, where he's protecting himself, protecting the camera, or in the alternative, just hiding. But it's very, very interesting
that's the
performance.
other interesting thing about the hiding, and the concept of I know that we're going to keep coming back to his performance because he's so central to this film, but the concept of voyeurism in this and hiding it's so I can kind of see why people would be squicked out by the movie, because these are kind of some unpleasant but interesting concepts. And
Well, the only thing that I can think of
yeah,
that is like this, that is, and even this is a much earlier film, but I think of M with Peter Lorre,
mm,
where you're forced to follow around, what TV tropes calls a villainous protagonist,
yes,
and thinking of this as like an early 60s movie, like even Psycho, which comes out, a few months after this. Psycho doesn't just immediately start with
yeah,
Norman Bates. um
yeah, that's a good
this
point. Yeah,
movie, this is who you are supposed to identify with, and
Yeah.
they even take it a step further, and in that, because he has the camera, like, you're put in his perspective, you
Hmm.
are the killer.
yeah.
And
Super disturbing
that's,
to people.
yeah, especially if you think about, like, early, when this comes out. So, like, that doesn't really surprise me. And the sexual nature of, everything also is, it's not shying away, while it does shy away from actually showing on screen acts of violence for the most part. It
Yeah, there's not a
does.
drop of blood in this movie.
The
Just
only blood we see is his blood at the very end. Like,
Not,
yes,
not
and
I
even
guess
though,
that's
not
true.
really.
It's
there's
in
blood on the end
shadow.
of his there's blood on the end of
On the
his
end of the
knife.
spear, yes, but that's it.
Yeah.
Not we don't see his neck where he's.
No, we don't. Like, and it's not even as gory as the Hammer Dracula, that's
That's
like
absolutely
a
correct.
few
And this is like
years.
3 years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the
Uh,
director says, that he's like, "People can't be that innocent, can they? I just don't understand why the violent reaction against it. People can't be that innocent, can they?" I just love the idea that, like, yeah, people are watching this and going, "Oh, I would never think of those things or do the," like, it's just all this idea of, like, because what you're talking about with being put in the place of the killer, it's like, "Oh, no, 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 I'm not a voyeur, I'm not a peeping Tom, I don't have weird sexual fantasies." It's like, "Well, how dare you try to turn this on me in this
but
way."
what's interesting about that is that film is traditionally the safest place to have, where you have permission to have weird fantasies by deferring to the film on the screen to have the fantasy for you, and you get to watch it. Um, so in a sense, you're the voyeur as well. You're sitting in a dark room and you're watching visions that somebody else has. It just so happens that this movie both does it and also implicates us in it because he's a voyeur and he's a killer. Um, you
I
know, uh,
think when you see, if you think of this movie as having a conversation with what we would think of as a slasher, from the 80s and on, I think one of the reasons why this movie is perhaps more controversial than, say, Halloween would be,
mhm,
is that Michael Myers is an elevated figure. He's superhuman.
mhm.
This guy, Mark,
Yeah,
is a flesh and blood human being, and he's pathetic. Like
yeah,
he's a pitiable character. Whereas I think by the time you got to, Halloween, like the people making these movies, they were like, people maybe don't want so much psychological realism. Let's
Hmm.
interject some monster movie
yeah.
DNA into
Laurie,
Mhm.
this.
Right.
Laurie is the
Well,
real person. Michael is a boogeyman. You know.
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
because it's challenging to see, and I don't mean this, and this to me is a different thing than when you watch like the last Joker movie, for example, right?
mhm,
I think they're different. They're in the similar cloth, but this is different. When you have somebody that you feel like it's challenging when you have somebody like Mark who you want to pity because the psychological trauma that was done to him
mhm.
is just abysmal, shocking, and terrible. So, but on the other hand, he's a killer, cold-blooded
Yeah,
killer.
he's
And
even.
it,
Oh, go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry.
so that it's tough because and we have that we have somebody in the movie, the main protagonist, who starts to care for him, and you want to empathize with that. It's like, oh man, this poor
Yeah, tell tell
guy.
tell us about the next. So Mark has started being a serial killer. It's new because they've just now started investigating this, but he started being a serial killer just like Red Dragon. And if you remember Red Dragon pretty well, and tell us about the woman that comes into his life and how much it fucks up his life as a serial killer, because that's what is sort of like. Tell us about Helen. Is it Helen? Is that right? I hang on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Okay. Yes,
Well,
Helen Stevens. Yeah.
also because she has her own kind of stuff with her blind mother
Hmm.
who seems to be pretty demanding. So the reason one of the reasons she's kind of drawn to him is there's a similar, I mean, not as bad, but it happens a lot. I mean, we joke that I have, I think a lot of us monster kids and, drama weirdos and everybody, we find our tribe because we have this kind of collective trauma seeks itself out, or maybe not
Hmm.
trauma, but that kind of insularity that's when tends to be a thing. I have my own cast and crew of just people. Rains is like, how do you find all your friends? Like, we
Yeah.
just, I don't know, this is how we come together, for better or worse. And Helen sees it because it's off-putting because he's literally a peeping Tom, has come to her window, even though he owns the building, like, it's come to her window and just watches because he kind of doesn't really understand human interaction in that way.
Yeah.
And so when we meet her, she's having a birthday party. But the interesting part is, she eventually brings in some cake. They interact, and it's super duper super awkward.
Yes.
But she brings in some birthday cake because she's drawn to this guy. I mean, he's a handsome guy, you know, very, I mean, he's very, like Joey said, he's very German
Yeah.
looking, you know,
Yeah, he was
tall.
such an Aryan, like a
Yeah.
Aryan youth type.
But as we find out, a lot of the people at her party, they may be friends, but it's people from the building.
Hmm.
It's not a lot of, so there's a certain, because she's so insular, living with her mom who's blind and who's kind of seems to be a little bit bitter about it, but you know, we get the impression she's kind of controlling, and they have a decent relationship, but there's a lot going on there in subtext as well.
Sure.
I mean, you could do definitely a huge chapter in a horror movie book just about this movie, right? And so
I
she's
enjoy
drawn to
their
him.
relationship, by the way.
Yeah,
It's really neat. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
but her, that kind of stuff, they're drawn together to the point where even when it gets creepy, she's willing to kind of forgive it a little bit because she finds him fascinating and
Not a little bit. Even
different.
at the end, she's like, "Tell me, why you did it.
Right,
Tell me
right.
all this." She's willing to go the whole way. She's kind of like one of those women who writes to the serial killers who were in jail and like wants to marry them and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Because she's
that's the
really
darkest aspect of what Helen is about,
Right.
is she's super into, because she has the opportunity to have a really boring but obviously very stand-up guy, from this other guy that she kind of is flirting with and maybe seems to be dating at first at the beginning of the movie,
Yeah.
and she tosses him over the moment the weirdo from
Yeah,
upstairs
he's kind
comes
of
yeah,
into
a,
life.
I
she's
gotta,
into it.
he's got kind of the Rat Pack kind of vibe. Hey baby,
Yes.
yeah, swingy, like, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Old boy. He calls the guy old boy or whatever.
Oh my
yeah, yeah.
god, yes.
But yeah, no, I really like the character of the mother. I think she's fascinating. I really
Absolutely.
liked her. I think she's weird. The actor is really weird. The actor's only like 5 years older than the actor who plays Mark, and only like, and Mark is not the guy actor who plays Mark is 9 years older than the actress who plays Helen. So they're very kind of close in age. But anyway, but the mother, I love everything she does. I think as a character, she's really interesting in this whole, yeah, like you said, she's irritated. She's mad at that this doctor seems to have effed up her surgery, and so that's why she's blind. And so she really, and she's obsessed with what they're both obsessed with this guy, with Mark,
Well,
because he lives above them. And so the mom can't see, so she says she like visits this room every day because she's under it. So whatever, she's like a blind person
Man, that's brilliant.
lives wherever, whatever's
I
whatever
could not
whatever
get
they're
enough of
under.
that. That was
Hmm.
amazing.
and it's not
Yes.
just that. Like, she's kind of bitter and she's finding her own way and she has her own kind of mannerisms. She's also seems to drink a lot.
Yes.
But there's also when she goes up and is in touching his face and he goes, "Hey, are you
Hmm.
photographing me?" All
Right.
that. There's a weird, interesting sexual tension
There
Yeah,
is.
totally.
There
There
is.
is
there that's like,
Well, it's
100%.
"Whoa,
funny you
mom."
mention it's funny you mention that there's she's actually playing she's playing older than she is, because
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
one of the things about this movie is they do a lot of like close up of people's eyes and a lot of close up of people's faces,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and the several times during that scene that Tony just talked about where they panned in very closely on her face,
Hmm.
I remember thinking like she is far too young and pretty looking to
Hmm.
be this girl's
The matron. Yeah.
mother, but
Right.
at the same time I think it works
Well,
because one, like in that scene she's kind of revealing her strength, because like previously that we've seen her, she's playing cards and she's drinking, and she seems kind of just like a burden on her daughter. And
Mhm.
then when this scene, which kind of is the mama bear scene,
mhm.
and
Well, she
like
But
immediately
also a
thinks she
seductive
immediately
one.
suspects him.
yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
mama bear scene, but also there's a sexual element that is very sort of older woman, younger man thing. I'm not saying that this movie was going to go there. I'm just saying that it's
No.
But
inescapable.
it's interesting because, like I say, the daughter is into him even when she knows that he's killed these women, and the mother is kind of into him or a little bit obsessed with him when she suspects that he's the killer. Like immediately she suspects him for some reason, and so I don't know if she just kind of has that
Well, I
vibe.
mean, maybe she's hearing aspects
Yeah,
of the
that's what I was
films,
gonna say. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think so. Yeah.
but
Well, the films are, I
also
don't know if sound, but yeah, but yes, she's probably heard
she's
weird stuff.
she's it's also kind of, if you look at fiction, the way fiction treats blind people, there's this trope where blind people are kind of
They're
quasi
Daredevil.
yeah, they're quasi mystical, and they see things that sighted people don't
But I
see.
kept saying
And
she was like Daredevil. I'm like, she's
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally, that's the Daredevil is the kind of final result of that trope.
Mhm.
What
And
I love though that that's so interesting because the relationships in this movie are both very healthy. See, to me, I thought she had a good vibe with her daughter. Yeah, she drinks too much, okay? But beyond that, her daughter's like, "Hey, I'm going to go out." And her mom's like, "Yeah, well, don't come back early." In other words, she's encouraging her daughter to go out. There's a lot of I thought there was a lot of healthy teasing and everything with them. So that was neat. But when she senses that Mark and her daughter are getting close, she tries damn hard to get Mark to fix himself. Not that that's ever going to be possible, but she's like, I think there's something unhealthy about you. I think
Yeah.
you should stay away from my daughter until you get it figured out,
I
and
mean, I think that that's interesting that she again, it's that there's that tension. There's several things in that scene that are fascinating.
yes,
Don't mess with me. Like
right.
I'm not a frail blind woman. This is how it's gonna be. Like she
Yeah,
definitely sends that vibe. There's also kind of a I kind of see where my daughter's coming from vibe.
right.
Mhm.
Um and then also it is interesting that instead of going, I don't like you, don't see my daughter, which is the standard
Yeah,
for most parents, there is my daughter must see something in you, and I kind of get that. Like there's something there. And again, it could be this again latching at this trauma meets trauma kind of
yeah,
a thing that happens. But she does say, take care of yourself
yeah, get
before you see
help.
my daughter. Get help.
yeah.
And
Well,
that I think is interesting because so many times it's stay away, and she might would hit him with her cane, or there's different a
yeah,
lot of different ways
Oh,
that could play out.
let's say for a second that yes, he was abused by his frankly his mad scientist of a father. Let's say that that's the only thing going on here, that he's just a traumatized individual. That's actually really compassionate, because like if he wasn't a serial killer, saying like, hey, I don't necessarily think it's healthy for my daughter to be involved with you, but get help, and maybe one
Right.
day you will be
yeah,
that person. That's not a terrible thing
right.
to do.
I mean, she
And
could be wrong, by the way, because it's just one woman's opinion. Turns out she's right and more than right. But you're right. It's a perfectly healthy thing for her to say, and yeah. There's a similar moment, and I don't know if this is about British culture or a time before people are actually getting help, but maybe this is a world where people just sort of navigate around one another's frailties and just try to make the best of it. But Helen wants to make this thing with this guy work, and Mark is being a pretty decent, funny, flirty gentleman when they're dating, but he's also occasionally weird. And there's the moment where he stops because he spots the two people making out in the shadows, and Helen sort of takes his hand and sort of redirects him the way that you might redirect a child. And it gives you a view of where this relationship would wind up if he wasn't a serial killer
Right.
bound to
It's
wind up
also
dead.
tough because, it does run into the realm of I think I can be the one to change him.
Mm.
And, that change doesn't that can't really happen unless that person is willing to change, right?
No,
Like
you're right.
that's but
Yeah,
but there is an aspect of that which is always you want that compassion to be true, but also it's usually doomed, no matter what. Especially, I
Well,
mean, in this,
it's
especially
doomed.
since he's a
It's
serial
doomed
killer.
here. I mean, he
Yeah.
even knows he's doomed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
the at some point where he basically, I can't remember which scene it's in, but he basically describes exactly. It's after he kills the actress and he's talking to his buddy that he
Right.
keeps blowing off to go to the movies with, and he basically says exactly what's going to happen to him. He says that, oh yeah, the police are going to figure me out because they seem a bit too clever. And
Well, that's why he has all the stuff set up, all the cameras.
Yeah,
the
he says,
lights,
I've been going through this over and over. But you're
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Drew. That there is that's a wonderful scene of like double meanings and everything when they're teasing one another about being the killer. And he says, "Oh yeah, I'm the killer. They're gonna figure me out soon enough because they're smarter than I thought they were." And it's oh boy, that's chilling because you're like, this guy is playing chess and nobody else knows it, but he also knows when he's going to lose, which is just fascinating.
Well,
And
and again, that he is a doomed character.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's like, even compared to like other characters like this, like Hannibal Lecter feels like Dracula compared to this.
Yeah.
This is a all too human
Yes.
character that, again, despite himself, has so much pathos. And
Yes.
and
his addictions are so strong, and this is like Hannibal Lecter is whatever the hell Hannibal Lecter is, but it's Hannibal Lecter can control himself, and he's a genius. This guy barely can control himself.
Yeah, he's not a super villain.
Yeah.
And Tony brought up the Joker movie earlier.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way about that movie, is portraying the Joker like this. Like, the Joker is an elevated character. He is a supervillain.
Yes.
Right. He it's kind of dragging him out of his element to portray him the way we see Mark.
Yes.
And I think that this is a horror story. The thing that's scary about it isn't necessarily that this guy is going around killing people. I mean, yes, that's unnerving, but it's also the fact that you have this guy that's just so damn sad.
Yes.
And there's this sort of like crushing. This is not a romantic story, even though there's romance in it. It's there's this crushing reality to it. And
it's closer to Martin in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Martin would actually be a really good double feature with this.
The other one would be Nightcrawler from 2014. I don't know if you saw that with
you're right, but I kept thinking over and over again of Red Drag that because Francis Dollarhide is becoming a serial killer and following this path that he can't undo, but at the same time he's developing this relationship with this nice girl that he met, and it's like, god damn it, of all times, like there's even the fleeting notions that maybe if you had met this normal girl earlier, maybe you would not have gone down that path. I think it's probably maddening to think that.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, how many? Even just this last week, there was a guy arrested who is a serial killer.
I haven't read up on that case yet.
It doesn't matter. My point is just how many serial killers get married and they seem to maybe stop when they get married for a little while, but then they go right back to it. It's like there's no amount of normal life that's going to make somebody.
I don't think that there's a
comfortable.
happy ending for this guy
No.
either. Like, I think it's like when you look at the. He has the line where he talks about how he never knew a moment's privacy his entire childhood. And then you have all the filmed evidence of the way his father abused him as part of this science experiment. Like, there is no universe where this guy would have turned out normal. Like, maybe there's a universe where he's not homicidal, but I don't think that in the world of this film there is a happy ending for this guy. Like, I think, at most he might be able to repress his, compulsions for a while. And he does control them for Helen to a degree,
Yeah.
but he does say, if I see you scared, I won't be able to help myself.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that he it's terrible that he knows his triggers, and he's self-aware enough to keep his girlfriend, his new girlfriend, from triggering. This is so disgusting and awful. The whole thing is just really, it is, I can understand why it was more than people bargained for. But
Yeah, I
it's
mean, it's a tougher movie. Like, it's a tougher movie than a lot of slashers that follow, because
yes.
you can distance yourself and go, well, there's true evil here, right?
Yeah.
And the Michael Myers is going to slash through people, and there's gore, and there's reasons why you may or may not want to watch that multiple
Well,
times.
or like
But
greaseball
in this,
slashers, like,
everything is
yeah, sorry.
it's the person it is I mean, it's the person next door, and
Yeah.
that's scarier. And
Yeah.
it's also, you know people who have various weirdnesses. And I think, and just the way that he kills and destroys and it's people close to him often.
Yeah.
That's the part that's also, it's not just I've targeted somebody, let's go slash him.
Yeah,
There he I mean, they're he's watching this woman, the actress, she's dancing and they're flirting,
let's
or
talk about
she's
that
flirting
scene.
with him,
That's one of our
and
topics. I want to
he's
talk about that scene. Yeah.
awkward, and she sees as like, oh, hey, my photographer friend, and hey, maybe
Yeah.
he's handsome, maybe, yeah, he's a little weird, but, and then he ends up killing her. So it's his whole, one of his whole deals is making is this, let me get close to somebody, and once I know them, I can picture them being afraid, and I'm gonna make them afraid and do this thing. And that's a way tougher and way more horrifying idea. Is that it's the people closest to you that could be your undoing, that would destroy you.
Well, the thing that's also really kind of sad about that scene is, the actress is like, she's a stand-in for this other actress who, at
Right.
least to my eye, looks a little bit younger than
Yeah,
her.
yeah, exactly.
They both have like that late 50s, early 60s sort of bombshell look about them. But this woman, like, she thinks he's talented, and she's thinking, if this guy will just put together a reel for me, the
Right,
producer at this studio will finally notice me for something other than a stand-in.
Yeah.
right.
And that's really, it's not just frightening, it's sad, because she
Yes.
trusted
Yeah.
him, and she actually likes him. And
Yeah.
Yep.
like the how predatory he is in this scene compared to,
Oh, yeah.
like, it's and the fact that the actor who plays Mark is able to switch back and forth from being so evil and manipulative, and then again he can elicit your sympathy in his scenes with Helen, is really impressive. Because like this whole scene, and the fact that she's like dancing around, and like she doesn't know she's in a horror movie at all.
No.
Like,
And she's so fun and so vivacious and seems like a great person, and there's not a moment of like bitchiness to her. I mean, she seems like a pretty genuine, cool. Admittedly, she's an actor, right? But she seems pretty cool. And yeah, and we know, watching it, because we already know he's a serial killer, that he's setting her up to die. It is
well, that's
shocking.
the Hitchcockian thing,
Yeah.
where the audience knows something that the character does not.
Yeah.
Well, he even has that line where he says that, where she's like talking, the actress, when he's about to kill the actress, she's like, what here, I found it. What would frighten me to death, says Vivian. Set the mood for me, Mark. He says, imagine someone coming towards you who wants to kill you regardless of the consequences. She goes, a madman? He goes, yes, but he knows it and you don't. Which I'm just like, that's so
Brilliant.
creepy.
That's like one of like several times in that movie
Yeah.
where the script is doing really good work here.
It's very well written.
And
Yeah.
this also reveals, this is another thing though that I feel like it did leave an imprint on contemporary slashers, is that this scene also reveals that this guy has a signature weapon. His camera tripod has a knife in it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it sounds absurd, but it totally works in the
Well, and
movie.
then he adds, so I was, because he says to Vivian, and then this, like, whatever, and you're like, what is she seeing? And Jason goes, just the camera. And I'm like, no, she's seeing something else. And at the end we see that it's a mirror, so they're like, he's making them see themselves as they get killed,
That is
so that
so
they
perverse
can see their
and
own fear, because he thinks that fear is the worst thing, that the most
well,
frightening
the
thing.
thing is, this is the true voyeurism thing, whereas this is the forced intimacy that is most awful about sexual assault and murder and anything else. He's trying to capture the greatest intimacy that he can capture, which is this person's fear at their own death that he's creating. It's an extraordinarily, I don't even know. Perverse isn't even the word. There's
I mean,
something.
it's the next level disturbing for sure.
Yes, yes, and it gets worse the more you think about it. And that's that's real dark. It's yeah. He's a combination voyeur, rapist, murderer, sort of all rolled into one, and then he seems to actually regard it as sort of a dark side of himself, so that when he's with Helen, he can kind of be charming. I mean, again, weird, okay, but he can still laugh and be charming and seem kind of normal. That's just so strange.
Well, he compartmentalizes so he can
Yes.
fit in, at least the best he can.
There's a concept that Patricia Cornwell talks in this book she wrote about Jack the Ripper, where she talks about decompensation, where a serial killer works up his own routine and rituals and follows them sometimes for years, decades, or for a short time, whatever. She goes, but inevitably they hit a point that they call decompensation, where the killer just said something goes wrong and they just kind of spin out. If, like, you can picture a gyroscope just suddenly just going haywire. And that's what happens with this guy when he goes to kill the model, because he's so frustrated. And because he shouldn't have killed the model. That made no sense at all. He knew he was being
Well,
watched. He knew,
he's a sloppy criminal ultimately.
yeah. It's, he's doomed when he kills that model, because that's too close. You'd think he'd be smarter than that. Though actually,
He doesn't even. I think that's him basically committing suicide, because he doesn't even bother to clean up
you're
the
right.
body.
Yeah, he knows they're going to come right for him.
Honestly, even the actress, like, he leaves her body on set. Like, this is somebody that subconsciously or even consciously wants to be found.
Yeah, he even goes to the trouble of filming once he sees that they're about to open the trunk where he's put the body, where the girl has fallen into, basically. He then pulls out his personal camera and films it, like films them opening it, just barely hiding, like he's just kind of behind something. He definitely doesn't.
Well, they probably wouldn't question him having a camera. He's a cameraman.
That's absolutely right.
No, but it's his own personal camera, and he's filming them opening the trunk. So they'd be like, "Why were you filming that? Why do you even know?" Like, anyway, I'm just saying that he is definitely tempting fate.
I think he just, on some level, just kind of wants it all to end, because he is this tormented individual because of what his father did to him. And so while he does he does get this sort of perverse enjoyment out of his murders, like, it seems like after that's over, he seems to have some kind of guilt about it.
He especially doesn't want to kill Helen. He's like very upset about this idea. He didn't want to photograph her because he thought that would be and all the things. So I think part of it is that he wants it to be over before he kills her.
He has lots of guilt. He is not without emotion. He just simply he has these urges that can only be satiated in one way, and that one way is illegal. And so he's, in that way he's like a pedophile or something else, where in a way, yeah, he wants to get caught, he wants to get killed because he's trapped, and he can't.
Well, he's been playing out his own death apparently as
Yes.
well.
He's been waiting
And
for this. Jesus Christ. Can we talk? Did you explain? Did we explain what was going on? To me, the least interesting thing is all of the abuse at the hands of his father, but it's clearly extremely important to the story.
I think it's interesting.
Okay, I kind of understood it, but let's talk about it a little bit. What was the deal with his super famous? Well, that aspect is interesting, but what's the deal with his dad?
So his dad was a famous psychologist, and his primary field of study was fear. And so one of the things he was doing is he was documenting the life of his son, which would be weird in of itself,
Yeah.
just following around and documenting your kid at all hours with a camera. But he also would just periodically terrify him. And like the only thing that we see on camera is this one point where, the son, like a lizard is thrown into the bed and the son is like scared of the lizard. But we hear like later on in the film, there's the scene where he puts on various recordings for Helen.
Yeah.
And, he's like age 4, age 7, and it's this child screaming.
Yeah.
And to me, this was like the most upsetting thing in the whole movie. And you don't even see it. You just hear it.
That's a good
why
point.
it's
I
so upsetting, because you don't
apologize.
know what's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe what I was reacting to is it's the thing that's explained the least, but you're right. We're given a lot of it, and
We're given just enough, which is
Right.
what this movie does do really well. Is it gives you enough information about what's going on to be disturbed by it, but not so much to where you want to turn the movie off and take a shower because you just feel gross. Like,
Yeah. Well, his dad also, like, you get the impression, most of his life was in some kind of recording, both film and audio recording. And to an extent, there's a bunch of film reels that are probably him at various ages being scared by his dad. But not only that, but when his mom dies, he films that.
Yeah.
So he's got this record of his mother passing away on camera, which is disturbing.
Yeah.
And then we find out that his cinematography, his interest in the camera is, as his dad's leaving, he gets a camera as a surrogate parent or parental unit, and that's why he hugs the camera. This camera is like, hey, I'm gonna go away. Here's a camera to hug, basically.
It's so mixed up in a sexual way because he
well,
also
it's also
fondles the
because
camera.
his dad marries like his younger assistant, and he's leaving on his honeymoon. The other thing that this stuff with the dad kind of reminded me of is it reminded me a bit of H.H. Holmes, the real serial killer, because of the way he had this entire house set up.
Oh, I didn't read that book. I still mean to. I just never did. I'm sorry.
Well, it's not just a book. I mean, there's tons of stuff on the guy.
Devil in the White City, right?
Yeah, but he's got this entire house set up as basically a giant torture chamber, and like in the last reel, it's like revealed he has the entire house wired for sound, and Mark is continuing to just record everybody.
Which again, it might be part of why the mom suspects him right away, because she's probably hearing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's possible that she's heard some. And that reminds me, there are some other like Sliver. I don't know if you recall. By no means a good movie like this, but part of the criminality in that movie was that the guy had cameras and microphones all over the apartment building that he owned, so that he could spy on people. And Sharon Stone is both repulsed and also intrigued by that. This is in movies always a thing that's both shocking and horrible and also exciting for people. You know, anyway, I just find that fascinating. Yes, because look, Helen still is, you know, it has sort of, I don't know what the word is. She's imprinted on him. She wants to see him survive, no matter how bad all this stuff is.
Well, she has sympathy for him, but I also think to a degree she's in shock because when he comes in, she says the she's like, this is just a movie, right? Like she wants it to be
Yeah,
fake because she cares for him.
yeah, you're
So
right.
that's shock setting in.
Well, and she probably thinks that, like every woman who is or every person, I should say, who's a codependent with an addict, is like, I can fix them. I can, like, if
Yeah,
it's
Well,
just the love of
also
a good woman.
like, I mean, you do the bargain when you're in a shitty situation, and even if you're in over your head, you start to do the bargaining thing in your head. Like,
yeah,
you're like, can I still love this person,
right.
and she begs for him to turn himself in even when he's about to kill himself.
Yeah,
And Mark, to his credit, knows that this is the end.
yeah,
Well, and
um
again, he's like, I want to film myself being scared because that's the ultimate. Even though he doesn't get to see the final work, the ultimate for him masterpiece is a good rendering, a good capture of true fear. And he's like, I'm really scared, and I'm glad I'm scared because this is like, I want this to be captured. And so he's got the whole thing rigged so that all the lights come on, all the cameras, whatever, and then he's kills himself on his own weapon. It's fascinating.
so
It's such a good movie.
insane. Yeah, it's amazing. I was thinking about addiction and people's stories of heroin addiction and various sexual acting out, and people always say that they're looking for a reproduction of their first big high, right? And I'm just trying to figure out, when Mark is upset because he's like, this time it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. I'm going to capture it perfectly. What the fuck is Mark trying to capture? Like, what is he trying to reproduce? I can't
What?
even, go ahead.
And he
Yeah.
says the thing about he says to Mrs. Stevens, who, because she's like, "What are you watching? Like, take me to your cinema or whatever." He goes, "Oh, it's no good." He throws himself up against the wall. He goes, "The lights fade too soon." And she says, "They always do." And he goes, "I have to try again." She says, "What do you think you've spoiled?" And he says, "An opportunity. Now I have to find another one." And he contemplates for a minute killing her, but then he's like, "No, I don't want to do that to Helen. I think maybe."
Yeah, that's you're exactly right. This is an amazing piece of work. You know, it's so funny how we spend a lot of time watching movies that, of course, don't have a lot of depth to them. I mean, like honestly, Operation Terror, Dracula versus Frankenstein, is more fun to analyze just as a thing that has some details about it that are fascinating, and but there aren't really themes. There's not really the script isn't going to give back the love that we try to bring to it. But this is a film that really does, you know. And and by the way, I think you should watch both. I mean, I think that you should spend time with both kinds of work. Uh, but yeah. Uh all right. I think we've hit on most of the major events of this. We should we haven't really hit on many some of the minor characters, um like the detectives and so forth, but I think people can find their way to it. Let's get our final thoughts, if you don't mind. What a fun discussion this has been. All right, so it was Tony, Julia, Drew, and then we'll go to our endorsements. Tony, what are your final thoughts?
I mean, I think it's a fascinating film. I was surprised again, like I said, I was surprised I hadn't seen it. It is kind of interesting to see because as I've said before, I tend to watch less. This could be real kind of films
I'm
of
with
this
you.
nature.
Yes.
Uh, but I think its historical context is what makes it fascinating. I think that the psychological aspects definitely make it an intriguing movie. Especially if you're a Hitchcock fan, this is probably right up your alley, even though it's a little grittier in some ways. Kind of it's hard to define, but it feels a little more gritty. for lack of a better term. I'm going to keep using that for now because it's in my brain. But I think it's an interesting case study. I think having a movie like this be reviled and then come back around to being, no, they're actually trying to do something with this and with, in the horror genre, and
Hmm.
alongside of Psycho, like, let's reevaluate where this stands. Great cast, and it looks pretty amazing. I was not expecting that. I didn't have any expectations, I guess. I was just coming at this blind when we decided, hey, let's do a podcast this week. Let's break up the break and take on, the, as some people have called it, granddaddy of slasher movies, or predecessor of slasher movies. I do find it a fascinating case study. Like I said, I kept coming back to Martin, and then eventually, kind of tangentially, but if you've seen it, you're probably, or if you do see it, you'll probably understand where I'm coming from. Nightcrawler from 2014. I can think different vibe, but there's seeds there, that I think come from a world where there's a Peeping Tom, from the 60s movie. I don't know if I would have just sought this out if we weren't kind of discussing it, but I'm glad we did, because there's a lot of really fascinating things in it. And again, I like some of the meta stuff that's in it. We see this set up in there's a whole chunk of fashion movie, fashion photography, slasher genre that happened in the 70s and 80s. And I think those kind of spring from this as well. So seeing where the seeds of a genre or a subgenre kind of come from is really neat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Julia, what about you?
Yeah, so I mean, for all the reasons that we've discussed, I think this is a must see. I just keep coming back to the amazing shadows and the contrast and the colors and the just the look of it, and then all the things we're talking about with the character development and the exploration of motivations and all that. The mother, by the way, who dies is also the mother of they're all part of the same family. In other words, the director is the dad, the mom is his, I guess, wife or whatever. But anyway, she's the
Mhm.
mother of the kid. It's all very incestuous to the movie. So all of that's fascinating. The history of it in its context or its place in history, in cinematic history. It's all really interesting. I'm so glad we watched it. Like I said, I really wanted to watch it just because we had been watching Scream and the Scream movies, and it was mentioned. But now I'm just like, wow, this is just something we needed to see on its just for its own sake. So yeah, I'm really glad that we took, like Tony said, took a break from the break to watch this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Drew, what about you?
This is just a wealth of good stuff in this movie, and yeah, I think this is essential viewing for anybody who considers themselves a horror aficionado. I think you have to have seen this movie at least once, even if you. Although I would recommend seeing it twice, because the first time I didn't appreciate it, and maybe it's just that I am more mature now, but this is a great film, and I would have missed out if I probably never would have watched it again if we hadn't watched it for the podcast. And I am so grateful that we did, because my gosh, this is such a good movie.
Thank you very much. I find that sometimes I'll watch a movie, in this case, I saw this movie in the theater and I didn't get as much out of it the first time as I did the second time. And it could be that it's because I had to watch it twice to understand it. But I actually think that there might be a thing of just how I watch movies, even when I'm not distracted, not looking at my phone, sitting in a theater. It's very possible that sometimes I'm not as engaged intellectually as other times when I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to themes and dialogue and stuff. And I wonder, does it take twice, or is it just because I also watched it once before? It was great, fine. This time I watched it and I realized this is brilliant. So I don't know. Have you guys ever found that?
I mean, I definitely feel like I am more analytical of a movie when I am watching it for the podcast, because I know we have to take it apart. But I think also, like, movies are kind of like songs. Like, sometimes you have to be in the right frame of mind to
Yeah.
connect with a movie in a certain way. And not everything you're not always going to be in the right frame of mind to get something out of a movie. And
Yeah.
also, like, taste change too. Like,
Mhm.
I think what I was wanting out of this when I first saw it was more of like a pure exploitation kind of movie, and maybe not as artistic as this actually is. And as an older man, I appreciate the stuff that I didn't really have the maturity to connect with.
Yeah, I mean, when I was fairly young, I didn't, for example, get Blade Runner, and now it's like, oh, okay. But I think also to your point, Drew, like if you're binging on a diet of video store slasher movies, a very like some great, some not as great, right? But anything you can get in that subgenre, and you hear about this movie that's kind of supposedly sets it all up, right? And maybe or maybe not, maybe you have, maybe you haven't seen Psycho. If I think being younger, you're not going to get out of this what you're going to get at our age.
Yeah.
I just, there's no way. And even then, you might be, oh, this old whatever 60s blah. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
saying that necessarily you would think that, but I know I've had things that I set with, came back to later, like, oh, I get it. But I wasn't ready to kind of think about it in that same way, because what I wanted was this thing. That's why you kind of rewatch things, go back to things post high school, maybe, if you didn't get it, or maybe you come back to it and go, yeah, that I like that, but boy, that was not as great. It can go either way. But
I don't think it's an age thing. I think that I think it ebbs and flows. I think
mm,
I'll actually go through periods of kind of depth and then periods of shallowness in terms of what I'm paying attention to around.
mm,
And at different times of my maybe it's almost as though how busy I am might actually be impacting how deep in I'm taking art as I watch it. Because I know that when I was in college, I could be extraordinarily deep and I could pick up on everything. And then there are other periods when I'm not picking up on anything, and I don't. And age is
is
the
that, or
least.
is that not college pretension? I don't know.
Maybe, who knows? It's possible.
I don't
It's
know. I'm not just giving you crap, but like,
no, no, no.
when you
It's
say
a
it that
super,
way,
super
I'm
good
just
point.
like,
Yeah.
But one other thing I just want to mention that I find fascinating in this whole discussion is that we often make hay about Julia Guzman color commentary, when admittedly at the beginning Julia goes, I heard about this in the Scream movies, which were a slasher, a whole thing. And then I recommended the precursor slasher movies, and I think firmly now we can say that one of us,
Yes,
Yes.
Mm,
Gabba Gabba,
I
one
don't
of
know.
us.
I don't know.
which I
I still
think
say
that
plenty of
was
really
that.
stupid stuff that
No,
No, no, no, no.
a
I just
legit
think
horror
that
movie aficionado would not say.
I don't think.
I think
I actually
in
think it's.
episode 1 or 2, you may not have gone. I heard, like, in the first few episodes, I don't know if you would have said, "Hey, I heard about that movie and Scream. Let's go. Let me recommend and watch this movie." Right? I think after this time, gabba gabba.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
We should
Oh, so funny. Oh my
we
God.
should maybe go back and see if you can make it all the way through Return of the Living Dead now.
Mm,
Even
I
I
don't know.
have a hard time with
How
that.
I'm
how about
okay with
no?
with people having
That
How about
was
we
I'm
don't
okay
and
too.
we
with
say
people
we
having
did?
their comfort zones, right? Like, but I do. I At the beginning, I just kept thinking. Throughout our discussion, I kept thinking about, like, wait a second,
That's
did
funny.
I hear
This
that right?
this
Which I
color
think is
commentary
fascinating.
person is now telling us the best kills in a Friday the 13th movie, basically, sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on
Um,
to endorsements, shall we?
Sure.
okay, yes. Sure, 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 sure. I have so many. I'm gonna try and not like endorse every old damn thing that I can think of because there's all these things popped into my head. But Tony, what do you got for us?
I mean, I've mainly been focusing on a lot of things, but I've really enjoyed Shout Factory, which I guess now they're called Shout Studios, which makes sense. they have been released. They have been doing their own Shaw Brothers box sets, and I've been trying to blaze through box set 1. I need to get box set 2, but there are some really cool movies that are I don't know if I would say deep cuts, but deeper cuts than perhaps the Arrow box sets do, which are really nice. I mean, those are some beautiful, like, they're not, I don't mean this as a competition. I just think, I mean, there's a lot of Shaw Brothers movies, to the point where at one point Shaw Brothers partnered with Creative, the people who make, like, sound cards and stuff, such, and they released a hard drive called the Z Eagle. It was basically a hard drive player of Shaw Brothers movies.
Huh.
And I still, it was just expensive enough that I couldn't really justify it. And, now none of them would have compared to a 4K release or even a Blu-ray release, 4K scan down to 2K. But I do wish, because they had a book that came with the Z Eagle that had all the movies, like a, hardbound book. I'm so mad that I didn't buy one of those. But anyway, the Shaw Brothers set that Shout has done, lots of women that you don't get a lot of hype about usually in some of the other the more popular Shaw Brothers movies, or the more out there ones that got kind of ported over to Kung Fu Theater, the ones we saw earlier. So seeing a bunch of these really kind of put that in perspective. And there's some amazing, and there's a few that are really tragic. I mean, as much as there is made about Greek tragedy, I think a lot of tragic bloodshed, tragic hero stories from China are almost even more tragic in some ways. I mean, a friend of mine brought up, like, hey, I mean, Hercules is still pretty darn tragic, right? But there's something about the kind of interplay of misunderstanding and honor, and that gets thrown around a lot. But just that idea of this martial arts prowess and staying true to yourself, but also where does that go when you find out somebody's not who you thought they were, all this kind of stuff that interplays throughout these Shaw Brothers films. That box set has got a lot of it, and it's really cool. So I'm looking forward to getting part 2. I've been watching a bunch of 4K stuff that I got, by the way. The Dread movie in 4K looks really good. I also haven't watched it yet, but I saw it in the theater. Sisu, if you haven't seen that and you want to see Nazis get destroyed, that one's just came out in 4K, which is awesome. And then, on the side, I'll continue to, like I said at the beginning, continue to pushing forward, trying to find a guitarist for Deserts of Mars. But I'm also got the first mixes back, the initial mixes to make notes on, and I'm super stoked about this album. So more on that whenever it comes out.
I can't wait to play some of it and maybe use some of it on the show. So because we've been using Deserts of Mars music as our show music for several years, and I wonder if a different 8-second segment can become.
I mean, there's a lot of good riffs in this one. The people I got to do solos and stuff on it, I mean, there's a lot of good melody. Our producer is really hard on us to make the best album possible, because he says, hey, it's my calling card. Jeff Henson from Red Nova Ranch. It's like, I'm here to make good albums, and I want that quality. I'm not going to make each one's on my calling card. So the other night he was talking, he's like, hey, you have some really good moments in this. And, I'll take that to the bank, not to try to overhype it, but that felt pretty good to come, that's why we hire a professional to, it's like when you get a really good editor who's not going to, he's going to tell it like it is, but also be mindful of what you're trying to do with your book or movie.
Yeah.
A good producer who you hire to tell you, this could be better, or why don't we massage this way, that way. So I'm super stoked.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Julia, what about you? Do you have any endorsements?
I have a couple. First of all, not that they need my endorsement at all, but Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is so exciting and fun. Edge of your seat the whole time. I loved it. I am in love with Hijack, which is a show starring Idris Elba on Apple TV, Apple TV Plus. That's the one. It's really fun. It's dropping an episode a week, and it's what you would expect from the title. It's about the hijacking of a plane. Idris Elba is, kind of the hero, although he's a quiet negotiator hero. He's not a Harrison Ford, Liam Neeson hero. Really, really good show. I'm liking that a lot. And then I just want to express my support for the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes, because I think
Amen.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
if the producers and studios are making billions of dollars, that they can afford to share a little bit of that with the people who are actually doing the entertaining.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. By the way, the guy who plays Lucifer on Sabrina was just on. He was somewhere online, and he was just talking about people don't understand the money that we make. But it goes when you think of stars, you think of stars, but secondary characters. He goes, I get 7,500 an episode. Taxes come out. 10%
Mm-hmm.
goes to my manager, 10 to my
Mm-hmm.
agent, 5 to my lawyer. So that's 25. So taxes come out, then 25% come out, and that's it. And he only does a few. He goes, we all have second and third jobs, and so they're just
Yeah.
trying to ask for a more fair wage.
Well, also
Yeah.
with streaming, I mean, we could probably have a
And
whole
AI
podcast
and
on
all
this.
that.
Like
Yep.
with streaming, just hey, your show, you can't. I know that you spent all these years trying to make this show. No one can see it. It doesn't have any release. For all intents and purposes, it's never existed for that. Or
Or
Oh, that's
we're gonna pay
shocking.
you.
scanning
We're gonna pay.
extras,
Yeah.
like 3D body scanning
Yeah, that's what I was
extras.
gonna say. Yeah, we're gonna pay you for half a day to come in and get a scan, and then we're gonna use your likeness forever.
The
Yep.
the AI conversation, I think, is one of the most important conversations that
Mhm.
we will be having
Absolutely.
going forward. Like
100%.
I believe that there is probably a responsible way to use this technology, but we have to do it in a way that it doesn't wreck the livelihoods of actual human beings.
Right.
And
Right.
so yeah, give them hell, like show these corporations, the it's John Henry versus the machine now,
Well,
like
it's
show
also
what a human being can do.
It's also
Yep.
goose with the golden egg, goose and the golden
Yeah.
egg, right? Like, what if we just take apart these pieces? Surely we
Mhm.
can find out what bases. Like, no, that doesn't work that way, you assholes.
Yeah.
I think it will get resolved, by the way. I really do. I think in the end, people will use a lot of rhetoric, but in the end, everybody knows there's a number you can get to, and it'll get resolved.
Well, here's
Well,
such a number, but it's a bunch of agreements.
Yes.
But yeah,
by the
hopefully.
way, I also do recommend it's different, but also somewhat prescient and also relevant is the Congress, the movie The Congress, which dealt with exactly this, where a woman sells her likeness forever to be used in every movie, and basically she cannot ever act, and it goes in some really bizarre areas, but it's really fascinating. This was years ago.
That's fascinating.
But yeah, I Draft House Films put it out. I actually saw it at Fantastic Fest at the time. Talked to some of the people who made it. That was cool. But definitely, as we're going into this, I think it's worth checking that movie out. It's depends on how artsy you like movies. You have to manage your expectations. But I found it to be a fascinating film, and again, prescient in ways that I didn't think of at the time.
Thank you for that tip. I wasn't even aware of that. Drew, what about you? Do you have any endorsements?
I want to double endorse Deadlock, which is an Australian show that's streaming on Prime in the States. That's lock as in a lake with an H. It is I endorsed it a few weeks ago. I have now finished it. Really good show, really sharp dialogue, a actually decent mystery that keeps you guessing. I've compared it to like Northern Exposure because it definitely has like that quirky small town comedy thing, but there are serial murders, so it's also a mystery show. I really also enjoyed it's a movie called Unwelcome. It's an Irish movie, and it's on Shudder. It's about a couple from London who moves to Ireland and has to deal with red caps living on their property. Great practical effects in this. It's also like if you're a fan of Gremlins, I think it's the logical R-rated version of Gremlins, if that makes any sense. The third thing I'm going to endorse that I've been enjoying a lot lately, Johnny Quest is on Tubi. I repeat, Johnny Quest is on Tubi. If you want to see one of the best like sci-fi action, atomic age cartoons ever, like Johnny, just check out Johnny Quest. I mean, I would be surprised if anybody who listens to this isn't at least a little bit familiar with Johnny Quest, but I love Johnny Quest. Like I remember when they used to marathon it occasionally on Thanksgiving weekends on TBS, and I always had just such a good time watching those, and it's been fun going back with adult eyes, and it holds up really well. Like the sense of design and everything that's on the show is like, the gadgets look cool, the monsters look cool, like, it's a lot more mature than I think any other Hanna-Barbera show ever was. So like, I don't know, just that I've been getting so much enjoyment out of is watching those old episodes of Johnny Quest. So
I mean, also an excellent idea now that the Venture Brothers movie wrap up. If somebody was smart.
Yeah.
Like because there's so much. We don't get Venture Brothers without there being a Johnny Quest. Like,
we definitely do not.
There's not a thing. So,
yeah. I think if you are a Venture Brothers fan and you've never actually gone back and watched Johnny Quest, I think you would be surprised how much enjoyment you would get out of it, and see the origins of the show within it. Yeah. Anyway, that's all me for now.
That's wonderful. You know what that actually leads me into the thing that I'll endorse, and I'll save the others for later. My endorsement is we are releasing this week Castle of Horror Anthology Volume 10, Thinly Veiled Saturday Mornings. And what this is people have written horror stories based on Saturday morning pop culture, like Johnny Quest or the Smurfs or what have you. And to keep from getting sued, they are thinly veiled. In other words, you change the names, you change, certain details. So it can be fun to read the story and guess, oh, I get it. That's what this is. And we've had several. We had thinly veiled 70s and then thinly veiled 80s. And now we're into, this is Thinly Veiled Saturday Mornings. So that comes out Tuesday. So definitely check that out. And I'll have more endorsements.
And later. Go see Jason at the San Diego Comic-Con if you'll
do that.
Absolutely. And this year it's actually more comics based of back to its roots.
Yes.
Even before the strike, there was announcements of it's back to the roots. By the way, Jason, I'm really angry at myself for not pitching and or writing a Thundar meets the horror side of Thundar for that.
Oh, well, we'll definitely.
I'm so angry. Like I should have done it, but.
So Jay, where can the people find you at the SDCC?
Yes.
I'm going to be doing 2 panels, both with Storm King Comics. So basically, Storm King is at booth 1935. Storm King is the company named after the Storm King from Big Trouble in Little China. It is the company owned by Sander King Carpenter and John Carpenter. And so I'm the writer of the new release, John Carpenter's Night Terrors, Usher Down, which is a horror story. And I'll be doing 2 different panels, one on Thursday afternoon at 4 in the afternoon, and one on Friday afternoon at 4 in the afternoon. So they're both Storm King related. So just come and listen in. So yeah.
Yay.
So that'll be really cool.
Well, this has been fun, you guys.
Yeah. We don't know when we'll be back, and we don't know what we'll be watching.
We'll be back pretty soon, I think. So yeah. So all right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Night.
Later.